You ever find yourself in a room full of people and still feel like no one really sees you? They smile, they talk, they even ask how you're doing, but something's missing. It's not just about being heard, it's deeper than that. It's about being felt. And somewhere along the way, you realized most people don't feel. They scroll, they react, they escape, but they don't stay. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you started pulling back. Not because you're cold, not because you don't care, but because you were tired. Tired of surface-level conversations, tired of showing up as a version of yourself that isn't even real. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Read that again. It's not the lack of people. It's the lack of realness. You could have hundreds of followers, be in group chats all day, even laugh out loud with others. But if no one gets you, not truly, you'll feel like a ghost drifting through a life that isn't yours. This is where the awakening begins. It doesn't start with fireworks, it starts with a whisper, a quiet, aching awareness that something isn't right. You begin to notice the disconnect, the fake smiles, the constant need to perform, the exhausting game of fitting in. And suddenly, you don't want to play anymore. Not because you've given up, but because deep inside you know there's more. More than this loop of pretending, more than these shallow highs, more than approval from people who never even knew your real story. And here's where it gets wild. That moment when you start to feel alone, like really alone, isn't the end. It's the beginning. Because it means something within you is waking up, something ancient, something powerful, something real. You start asking dangerous questions. Who am I outside of all these roles? What if I stop trying to be liked? What if solitude is the path, not the punishment? And the answers? They don't come in a rush, they come in silence. They come in long nights and quiet mornings. They come when you finally stop running from yourself. You sit with the ache, you face the mirror, you look into your own eyes and ask, what have I been avoiding? And at first, it's brutal, because you realize how much of yourself you've abandoned just to be accepted. But then something shifts. You stop craving noise, you start finding beauty in quiet, you stop chasing company, you start honoring your own presence. It's lonely, but it's real, it's heavy, but it's honest, it's uncomfortable, but it's yours. And maybe, just maybe, this is the first time in your life that you're actually meeting yourself. Jung called it individuation, the sacred process of becoming who you were meant to be, beneath the masks, beneath the expectations, beneath the noise. So if you feel alone right now, good. It means you've stopped faking it. It means your soul is craving depth. It means you're on the edge of transformation. Most people numb this moment. They run back to distraction. They drown in entertainment. They silence the whisper. But not you. You're still here. You're listening. And that means you're ready. Ready to go deeper. Ready to let go. Ready to rise. The loneliness you're feeling, it's not emptiness, it's space. Space being cleared for the real you to emerge. You're not being punished, you're being prepared. And as we go further, we'll uncover what's on the other side of this silence. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly feel free. It starts with discomfort. It starts when the things that used to excite you now feel hollow. The group that once made you feel included now feels suffocating. It's subtle at first. You go out with them, laugh with them, scroll through their highlights, but something feels off. You're not sad. You're not angry. You're disconnected because you're no longer pretending. You're tired of shrinking to fit in, tired of biting your tongue, tired of clapping for things you don't even believe in. Carl Jung once said, "Fitting in comes at the cost of your authenticity." Read that again. It's the quiet tragedy of our time. Trading who you are for a version that pleases the crowd. But here's the thing. You can't grow where you're constantly being shaped. And so it begins. The slow, painful process of breaking away. Not because you hate them. Not because you're better. But because you're done hiding. And that's where individualization begins. The moment you stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What do I think?" That shift, it changes everything. Suddenly the jokes don't land the same, the conversations feel recycled, the validation feels empty, and the silence after stepping away, it's deafening, but it's also the first sound of truth. Because leaving the group isn't just physical, it's psychological, it's spiritual, it's existential. You're detaching from a system that rewarded conformity and punished authenticity. You're grieving the mask you wore for years. You're grieving the version of you that played along, and yeah, it hurts. No one tells you that being real can feel like a loss, that healing feels like breaking, that freedom comes with isolation. But Jung knew this. He called it the path of individuation, a sacred, solitary journey of becoming, not becoming better, not becoming impressive, just becoming real. You start saying no more often, not because you're difficult, but because your soul can't take another fake yes. You stop explaining yourself because your peace is no longer up for debate. You stop chasing connection and start honoring alignment. People call you distant, cold, selfish, but you know the truth. You're finally being honest. And that honesty, that's where your power begins. Think about it. All the greatest minds, the truest artists, the freest souls, they walked away from the crowd, not because they wanted attention, but because they refused to be diluted. And now it's your turn to face the ache of disconnection, to sit in the void between who you were and who you're becoming. It's a lonely space, but it's sacred because in this space you meet yourself. Not the social version, not the filtered version, the raw, unedited you. And when that happens, everything changes. You start to trust your inner compass. You start to feel whole without applause. You start to move differently, not louder, just deeper. The world may not understand. They might say you've changed, and they're right. You have. Because you've stopped performing and started living. This is the price of freedom. But here's the paradox. The more you embrace solitude, the more magnetic you become. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you've stopped trying altogether. And in a world addicted to approval, authenticity is revolutionary. So if it hurts right now, if you're sitting in that in-between space, between belonging and being, between comfort and truth, good. You're right where you need to be. Because this isn't the end of your story. It's the start of your becoming. And what comes next, that's where the real transformation begins. They told you loneliness was a curse. A symptom of failure, a sign that something is broken in you. But they never told you what kind of transformation waits inside that silence, because they don't know. They've never stayed long enough in the silence to hear what it really says. There's a difference between isolation and solitude. One suffocates, the other heals. Isolation is when you run away from the world in fear. Solitude is when you choose to be with yourself in truth. One is escape, the other is evolution. Carl Jung didn't see solitude as punishment. He saw it as preparation, a sacred place where the noise of the world dies and the voice of the self finally speaks. But here's the catch. That voice isn't always kind at first, because before it empowers you, it breaks you, not to destroy, but to show you all the illusions you've been living under. The illusion that your worth comes from attention, the illusion that you must be seen to exist, the illusion that connection always means closeness, the illusion that silence equals emptiness. In solitude, these illusions die, and with their death, something begins to stir in you. A quiet confidence, not built on applause or reassurance, but on clarity. You no longer need someone else to echo your thoughts to believe they matter. You begin to trust your own inner knowing. This is where real power begins. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining yourself. You stop apologizing for being intense, sensitive, too quiet, too deep. You realize those were never flaws. They were signs that you were never made for surface-level living. That your soul craved depth, craved stillness, craved the uncomfortable beauty of being truly alone. In a world addicted to constant connection, true solitude becomes rebellion, but it's a rebellion that leads to mastery, because the one who can sit with themselves without needing to numb, distract, or escape is the one who becomes untouchable. You become your own anchor, your own source. You walk into a room without needing anything from it. That kind of presence, it doesn't shout, it doesn't seek, it radiates. Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you. It comes from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And so, in solitude, you learn a new language, one only the soul understands. You stop shouting to be understood. You start whispering to yourself, and somehow that's where the real understanding begins. The world may still not get you, but you do, and that changes everything. You don't isolate yourself out of fear anymore. You retreat like a warrior sharpening their blade, not hiding, preparing. This isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. It's not a retreat, it's a rebirth. Solitude becomes your sanctuary, a place where truth isn't filtered through fear, but revealed in full honesty. You cry, you breathe, you stare at the ceiling some nights wondering what the hell you're doing. And yet, you stay. You resist the urge to run back to noise, to distractions, to temporary comfort that comes with long-term cost. And by staying, you transform. You don't become colder. You become clearer. You don't become harder. You become deeper. You don't become indifferent. You become discerning. Now, when you return to the world, you bring something it rarely sees. Someone who cannot be manipulated by loneliness. Someone who doesn't beg to be seen, but invites to be felt. You are no longer a seeker of light in others. You are the light. So let them call it isolation. Let them misunderstand, because you know better. You didn't lose yourself in the silence. You found it. And now that you have, are you ready to live from this power? You're surrounded. Notifications, parties, group chats, likes, and yet you feel it. That quiet, aching hollowness. A loneliness that doesn't come from isolation, but from pretense. You smile at their jokes. You nod when they speak. You show up. But deep inside, something's missing. Because somewhere along the way, connection got replaced with performance. We stopped seeing people and started scanning for approval. We stopped listening and started waiting for our turn to speak. We stopped caring and started performing. Carl Jung saw this coming long ago. He warned us, the more people are collected together, the more insignificant the individual becomes. And yet we chase the crowd, afraid that if we pull back, we'll disappear. But the real danger isn't in being alone. It's in being surrounded and still feeling unseen. Modern relationships often run on a hidden economy. What can you do for me? Will you entertain me? Will you validate me? It's not friendship, it's transaction. People call it connection, but it's built on exchanges, not understanding. You laugh a little louder than you feel. You share a little more than you're comfortable with. You shrink a little smaller to avoid conflict. And all the while, you wonder, why does no one really know me? It's because most don't want to know you. They want the version of you that's easy to digest, that fits into their timeline, that never challenges their comfort. And so we learn to play roles, the agreeable one, the funny one, the always available one. But every role played too long becomes a prison, and every conversation that lacks truth leaves your soul just a little more malnourished. That's why you feel drained after being with people who don't see you, not tired, empty, because human connection isn't about frequency. It's about authenticity. Carl Jung believed that depth was dangerous, not because it destroys, but because it reveals, and most people aren't ready to be revealed, not their shadows, not their fears, not the parts they hide under forced smiles. So they keep it light, they keep it loud, they keep it shallow, but you're craving something else. You don't want more friends, you want real ones, the kind that don't flinch at your silence, the kind that can sit in truth, not just noise, the kind that don't need small talk, because they can handle your storms. But before you find them, you must become them. That means no longer showing up just to fit in, no longer laughing when your soul feels quiet, no longer pretending to care when something feels false. It means risking the loneliness that comes from walking away from almost friendships to make room for something real. It means not apologizing for the parts of you that don't play well with the surface level world. You're not broken for wanting depth. You're rare, and in a world obsessed with visibility, you've chosen authenticity. That's power. Yes, it may feel isolating at first. You'll miss the messages. You'll scroll through silence. You'll wonder if something's wrong with you. But soon the noise will quiet. And in that quiet, something real begins. You'll meet people who don't just hear you. They understand you. People who don't just want you to entertain. They want you to expand. And the irony, they were always out there. But they don't exist in the spotlight. They live in the quiet corners of honesty. So if you're in a room full of people and still feel alone, you're not crazy. You're just waking up. Don't let the fear of loneliness drive you back into a life of pretense. Let it lead you deeper. Let it peel away the masks. Let it purify your circle. Because once you taste truthful connection, you'll never settle for the shallow again. There comes a moment when the silence you once feared becomes your greatest companion. When the notifications stop, the invitations fade, and the spotlight dims, and what's left is you. No roles, no performances, no validation, just you, and the version of yourself that was buried under expectations, opinions, noise. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Loneliness isn't a punishment, it's a pause, a sacred space the world never taught you how to honor. It's not the absence of others, it's the presence of you. Because when the world gets quiet, you finally hear the voice that always whispered beneath the chaos, the one that says, "I've missed you." In solitude, you meet your shadows, not to fight them, but to finally understand them. The insecurities, the fears, the guilt, they rise, not to torment you, but to be acknowledged. Because healing doesn't begin when you run from the pain. It begins when you sit with it, when you ask, "Why are you here? What are you teaching me?" And in that honesty, you start rebuilding. You start seeing your worth not in how many people need you, but in how deeply you know yourself. Solitude becomes soil, and in that soil, something new begins to root. Not a mask, not a role, but a self, authentic, raw, whole. You begin to move slower, more intentional. You question the life you built before you ever questioned your own desires. You start replacing noise with stillness, busy with meaning, people-pleasing with boundary building. Because now, you don't crave company. You crave connection, not just to others, but to your purpose, your peace, your essence. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world asked you to be, not the sum of your traumas, not a reaction to expectations, but someone reborn in the quiet, refined by reflection, forged in fire, and cooled in calm. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you rebuild yourself in solitude, the less alone you actually feel, because you're no longer abandoning yourself in the pursuit of others. You walk through life with a certain calm, an unshakable confidence that doesn't shout but radiates. You become magnetic, not for your perfection, but for your presence. Because when someone has sat with their darkness, they no longer fear the shadows of others. When someone has embraced their imperfections, they stop demanding perfection from the world. This is the power of inner work. This is the gift of choosing solitude not as an escape, but as a sacred return. To look in the mirror and not flinch. To stand alone and still feel whole. You stop chasing meaning and start creating it. You stop waiting to be chosen and realize you've always been enough. You start asking deeper questions. What do I value? What do I want to give? What am I no longer willing to tolerate, even from myself? And when those answers come, they don't shout, they whisper. But they are true. In the stillness, you begin to remember. Not the version of you that performed or pleased or pretended, but the version that once dreamed without limits, that once felt without apology. That version is not lost, just buried under layers of survival. And now, in this quiet, you start digging, not because you're broken, but because you finally believe you're worth uncovering. So yes, the loneliness hurt. At first, it broke you, but then it built you. Now, you are not just a reflection of the world. You are the mirror. You don't need permission to exist deeply. You are the permission, and the life you begin to live from this place of self-awareness isn't just peaceful, it's powerful, because it's yours. Every part of it, rooted not in noise, but in truth. So ask yourself now, when was the last time you sat in silence and truly listened? And then one day, you open your eyes not to the noise of the world, but to the stillness inside you. You've been alone. You've walked through silence so heavy it echoed. You've sat with shadows, spoken to your fears, held your wounds with trembling hands, and didn't look away, and now you're still here. But something's changed. You're not stepping back into the world as the same person who left it, because once you've truly met yourself, you can never pretend again. This isn't about becoming invincible, it's about becoming undeniably real. Before, you played the part, said what they wanted to hear, smiled when you were expected to, hid the chaos behind a polished mask. Now, you speak slower, move with intent, and when you look someone in the eye, you see them, because you've seen yourself. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But no one tells you the cost of that privilege, the nights you question everything, the days you feel like you're falling apart just to discover you were never whole to begin with. You were layered, and peeling those layers hurts. But what you find underneath, it's not weakness, it's clarity. Now you know what you believe in, not what you were taught to believe. You know who you trust, because you've learned to trust yourself. The version of you that's walking back into the world isn't seeking approval. It's seeking alignment. You no longer crave crowds to avoid silence. You don't fill your calendar to feel important. You don't shrink for comfort or stretch for validation, because now you understand. Power isn't in being loud, it's in being solid. People will notice. They won't know what changed, but they'll feel it. They'll treat you differently. Some with awe, some with confusion, some with fear. Why? Because you no longer dance to the rhythm of their expectations. You found your own beat. You are the quiet storm. You speak less but say more. You show up fully but ask for nothing. Not because you don't care, but because you finally know what's worth caring about. And the world? It will test you, try to pull you back. Whisper lies that you're too different, too distant, too much. But the one who's met their true self doesn't fear being misunderstood, because you didn't come back to fit in. You came back to stand out, not above others, but beyond the need to be anything but yourself. Your relationships change. You no longer cling. You no longer chase. Because now you understand what's meant for you flows to you, and what leaves is clearing space. The peace you've earned was paid for in solitude, and now you protect it ruthlessly, lovingly, unapologetically. You draw boundaries, not to shut people out, but to keep your center intact, because your inner world is no longer a battlefield. It's a sanctuary, and anyone who enters must take off their mask too. This is where you begin to truly live, not by default, not by tradition, not by fear, but by choice. You wake up not asking, what do they want from me, but what does my soul need today? You stop chasing purpose in titles, roles, and applause, because now you embody purpose. And in this version of you, there's still softness, but it's laced with fire. There's still kindness, but it doesn't beg. There's still love, but it isn't blind. You've turned loneliness into self-awareness, silence into strategy, and solitude into power. And as you stand now, not lonely, but whole, you realize you were never meant to be like them. You were meant to lead yourself. And the question isn't, can you go back to who you were? It's, will you ever want to? Because now, when the noise comes back, when the world gets loud again, when the masks return, you won't get lost. You'll stay anchored, because you've built a home within yourself. So now I ask you, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. Are you really afraid of being alone, or are you afraid of meeting who you truly are in that silence?